He built his company from zero to over $75 million. Fully remote, no offices, no commutes, talent hired from anywhere on the planet, $1 million months, 8-figure revenue, a decade of proof that the traditional office was a relic. And then he brought everyone back in. What happened next, and why, is one of the most instructive stories in the entire remote work conversation. And it challenges almost everything the internet has decided it believes about how modern businesses should be built. There was a moment around 2014 when a certain kind of entrepreneur looked at the traditional office and decided it was finished. 4 walls, a commute, a lease, a city you had to live in because the building was there. All of it suddenly seemed not just unnecessary, but actively limiting. Remote work was not yet a mainstream conversation or a pandemic-era necessity. It was just a bet that a small number of founders made early, before the playbook existed and before anyone had proven it could work at scale. For a decade, that bet paid off spectacularly. Distributed teams scaled to 8 figures. Overhead stayed low while output climbed. The early adopters looked visionary and the skeptics looked foolish. And then one of remote work's most vocal champions did something that contradicted everything he had publicly stood for. Not because the model had failed him. It had not exactly. But because he looked around at the companies operating at the level he was trying to reach and noticed something difficult to argue with. The businesses he most wanted to emulate almost universally had a physical presence. He could count on one hand the companies at his target level operating entirely remote. The question he had to ask himself, stripped of ideology and ego, was whether he wanted to swim against that tide on principle or stack the odds in his favor. The phrase that finally moved him past the resistance was deceptively simple. What got us here won't get us there. Before committing, he had to be honest about why he had not made the decision sooner. The first reason was selfish. He did not want to be tied to one location. An office is a commitment to a city, and that constraint sits uncomfortably with founders who have built location-independent lives. The second reason was fear of commitment, the reluctance to lock in something expensive and disruptive to undo. The third was the most rational. Remote hiring genuinely worked better. The talent pool available to a company with no geographic restrictions is incomparably larger than one limited to a 20-minute commuting radius. These were real trade-offs he had weighed the same way for 10 years. What changed was not the trade-offs, but his honest assessment of what the business needed next. In the 12 months following the decision, the company went from 0 in-person employees to more than 20. The experience produced 5 lessons that reframe what the remote versus office debate is actually about. The first and most foundational is that culture and collaboration do not scale through screens the same way they scale through proximity. He had worked with talented, dedicated people for 5 years and never met their spouses, seen some of them in person fewer than 10 times across the entire relationship. He had built what he believed was an excellent virtual culture, camera-on meetings, periodic offsites, structured touchpoints, and it worked up to a point. The moment the office opened, culture began compounding faster than any intentional program had ever produced. Conversations that happened because 2 people were in the same room rather than because someone scheduled a Zoom, the kind of incidental, accumulative relationship building that happens continuously in a physical environment and has to be artificially engineered in a remote one. The difference was not incremental. It was categorical. The second lesson was about energy as an environmental property rather than a personal one. Remote work places the entire burden of energy generation on the individual. On a low day, there is no external environment to carry you, no ambient productivity, no collective momentum to get caught in. The office changes that equation, but only past a specific threshold. The benefits of physical presence do not materialize fully until headcount reaches a critical mass of around 7 people, at which point the room begins generating its own energy independent of any single person's state on any given day. Below that threshold, the office is a question. Above it, the office is an answer. The third lesson was the most surprising. Hiring locally is a fundamentally different skill from hiring remotely, and the playbook that works brilliantly for a distributed company fails almost completely when the geographic filter tightens to a 20-minute radius. The talent pool shrinks dramatically. The sourcing channels that once produced floods of qualified applicants become unreliable. And screening criteria shift in ways easy to underestimate. Commute tolerance is not a soft factor, it is a hard predictor of retention. Clarity about what the role actually requires has to precede the search entirely. The fourth lesson is the most practically impactful for any business depending on speed and coordination. Problem solving in person operates at a categorically different rate than problem solving remotely. A question generating a Slack thread and a 3-hour wait gets answered in 30 seconds when both people are in the same room. These compressions accumulate across a day into meaningful differences in ground covered, and compound across a month into competitive advantages that remote-first competitors simply cannot match without heroic effort. The fifth lesson reframes the commute entirely. Approached deliberately, it is not lost time. It is protected time insulated from both work and home demands. Audiobooks, meaningful phone calls, quiet decompression on the drive home that allows genuine presence with family rather than carrying the residue of the workday through the front door. The commute is not the cost of the office. It is one of its most underrated benefits. Remote work created enormous value. It built companies, generated wealth, and gave talented people access to opportunities geography had previously locked them out of entirely. But what it could not do, at least not indefinitely, was replace the compounding advantages of proximity, the trust that builds faster when people share physical space, the energy a room generates that a screen cannot, the speed of collaboration that transforms when the distance between people collapses to the length of a hallway. The $1 million months came back, and they came back when the team came together.